Right. Any questions before we get started? Administrative or otherwise. If your questions are pertain to the lab itself, I could answer them right now, or you can wait till the labs. Either way is fine. Also, I will be doing two of the labs, and then you have two other instructors for the others. So I'm not sure which section you're in. I think there's 4 sections. I have 2 of them. Somebody else has the other 2. All right. The lecture portion is online and will always be online. The lab portion will be in person. Now, in some cases, your instructor may choose to hold a particular lab session online. That's up to them. Whatever applies to your section is specific to your section, lab section. It may not transfer to the other lab section. So if you're like a buddy of mine and section 3 is online this week, that doesn't mean your section 1 will be online. So just remember that. Always clear it with your instructor, your lab instructor. Okay. If there are no other questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share Canvas. This is going to be our primary portal for all class-related postings, communications, and assignment submissions. And so you will upload your assignments through Canvas, all the PowerPoint lecture notes, the syllabus, useful links, class announcements. All of that is managed through the Canvas portal. So if you have not used it, I suspect all of you have used it, but if you have not used it, I would take some time to familiarize yourself with Canvas. It's pretty user-friendly. It doesn't require that much know-how. Designed to be pretty user-friendly. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, does everybody see Canvas on their screen? I hope. Does somebody just type in yes on chat, and then that should be okay. Okay, thank you, sir. Ivan, Adrian, appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so as you can see, as I mentioned, Canvas is pretty self-explanatory. We use modules here, so you have a syllabus, a section for labs, useful links, then modules for week 1, 2. Sometimes I'll combine the weeks as well, so you might have weeks 2, 3, and 4 like under one module. Usually what I use the modules for, the weekly modules right here, will be to post the PowerPoint, the lecture notes. And in some cases, I will also put in additional links. There's some examples that I work through sometimes in lecture. I'll use like Microsoft Paint or something like that. Usually Microsoft Paint. It serves like for me, as the blackboard, I guess. And so if I do that, I'll save that Microsoft Paint file as a BMP file or JPG file, and I'll post it online on Canvas as well. So you will have everything. Now, in case you don't access Canvas, the recording of the lecture will be also online, so you can always go back and revisit it that way. Right? So you have a few opportunities to look at the information that has been discussed during lecture. Here you'll notice there's a module for labs. So the first 2 labs, Lab 1A and 1B, have been posted. There will be others throughout the semester. If you have gone through the syllabus, you realize that there are other labs as well. There's 5 labs total. And the submission for the labs, however, so this is key, right? Because you have a lecture canvas, but you have a lab canvas. Lecture canvas and a lab canvas. So some information from the lecture canvas, specifically the labs, the write-up for the labs, the instructions for the labs, may also be reposted on the lab canvas, depending on your instructor. Okay. However, it may not always be consistent across the lab sections. Okay, so each lab is unique, but there's a great deal of overlap as well. Okay, but this is the key part. Your lab, the written part of your lab assignments, will be uploaded through the lab canvas, not the lecture canvas. Okay, the lab canvas, not the lecture canvas. Your lab instructors, in some cases it'll be me, in some cases it'll be the other 2 instructors, will grade your lab. there is a presentation requirement as well for the labs. They will grade the presentation, they will grade the written portion, and then I will get the grades for both combined into one grade. Then I will average that lab grade with your other assignment grades. What are the other assignments? They're like your midterm and your final. And you will get one grade for your lab and lecture. I realize it's a lot of words that I'm saying right now. I'm going to go through the syllabus and repeat this again, okay? But I just wanted to let you know that whatever grade you get for your lecture is the same grade you get for your lab. It's one grade. All right, so let's look at the syllabus. Can everybody see the syllabus? Yes? Okay. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So lecture 10 to 11:50. We won't always go to 11:50. We'll likely go usually till 11:15, 11:30. So there's no break, but I'll just go right straight through. But it is scheduled for 11:50. Once, sometimes in the past, we have gone a little bit later, like all the way to 11:50. I apologize. It's a lot. 2 hours of me talking at you is a lot. I realize that. So I try to stop around hour 20 minutes, hour 30, not more than that. But this part is online. The labs are in person, as you can see. Okay, and so the first two sections are today, 1 p.m. to 4. We won't go the full 4 p.m., especially the first day. It's very rare that we'll go the full section, the full duration of the lab. However, on days that we have presentations, it's probable that we will go the full duration because it takes that much time to get through all of the presentations. Okay, so it'll vary basically, but that much time has been given to us in case we need it. We won't always need it. That's what I'm trying to say. So you have two Tuesday sections today, starting at 1 p.m. My section is they're all in building 7, but and they're in adjacent rooms, 214 or 215. So you can't miss this. This is right where the student room is also. There are rooms behind that, if you're not familiar with that. So second floor, building 7, you can see the student room as soon as you walk up the stairs. There's 3 rooms that touch that. It's not the room immediately to the right. If you're looking at the student room, it's the 2 rooms behind. Okay, those are 214, 215. Then you have one section with me tomorrow as well, at 8 a.m. For those of you who are in my Wednesday section, I'm telling you right now, I'll send an email. We won't start at 8 a.m. We'll start at 9 a.m. Okay, 9 a.m. tomorrow. And then you have another section on Wednesday with Professor Mann. Professor Mann may choose to start at 9 a.m. or choose to start at 8 a.m. I leave it up to Professor Mann, and they will communicate to you. But my section, if you're in my section, section 2, we will start at 9 a.m. And I will again send an email just to those in my section. Okay, so my name, Professor Taiwari, right here. I'm the primary instructor for this course. My email, right here. Then you have Professor Jade Orr. Professor Orr's email is right here. Office hours are right here. And you have Professor Anupama Mann, or Mann. Professor Mann's email is right here as well. Okay. Their Zoom link for their office hours are here. Looks like I didn't provide a Zoom link for my office hours. My office hours are in person. So, and anyway, clear with Professor Mann or Professor Orr the nature of their office hours in person, over Zoom. They will clarify that with you. It's up to them how they want to hold. Sometimes I might hold office hours on Zoom as well. In that case, I will email everybody in case you want to stop. There's a course book for this. It is now the 5th edition, so I just had to change this. In fact, I have to get my copy as well. So Last year we used the 4th edition. This year we use the 5th. But I'm going to get my copy, and if there's major changes, I don't think there will be, but um, these readings are with reference to the 4th edition. However, I may change these once I get my copy sometime this week or early next week, and then the order may change a little bit, but I hope not. I've used I think when I first started teaching this, I used the 2nd or 3rd. There wasn't that much deviation from edition to edition. So anyway, so there's a course text for this. I do give you PowerPoint lecture notes. There's a course text as well, and then there's of course a verbal portion, which I'm giving right now. It's important to remember that you should really be reading the book, maybe reviewing the notes, and then listening and taking additional notes as you see fit. Okay. One of the dangers of relying on recordings, and I've taught this long enough, and then I can tell you this, is that students online format can be very useful and work very well if you have the discipline to kind of pay attention, take notes, and revisit the content you didn't understand later. On the other hand, if you're like, look, I'm just going to log in so professor knows I'm there, and then I'm just gonna tune out by putting my screen on black, I have no objection. Again, you guys are adults, and you should do what you should use your time as you best see fit. I mean, you're paying for this, right? I know you've heard that before. But and so my only request from you is that if you do show up, don't be disruptive. This applies for labs as well as lectures. I don't take, I'm not taking the attendance here. So it's really up to you how best you want to use this. That as I said, my only request is don't be disruptive if you are here. I find that when students are engaged and ask questions, learning is better for everybody, right? Sometimes even I will be explaining things, and I realize that I have not explained it very well, or sometimes I myself don't understand something that I have explained, right? What does that mean? It means that and you've heard this phrase before, I know. You really don't understand something unless you teach it. And often I will have to relearn things as I'm teaching them because students ask questions which kind of force me to examine concepts and how I'm deploying these concepts in lecture. So, I always encourage questions. How do you pose questions on an online format? You can post them in chat. So I'll have the chat open, and I'll try to pause every 10, 15 minutes and answer as many questions as I can. I would prefer that. Because if I'm in the flow of lecturing and you start blurting out questions verbally, it's a bit difficult. So pose them in chat, and then I will try to go through them. On the other hand, if I don't address your question that you have posted in chat, when I've paused, every 10 to 15 minutes when I've paused to review the questions, you can unmute yourself and speak, right? Now, if you have something really burning and you really want to share with the class, that's fine. Unmute yourself, say, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just was confused about this, or I wanted to share this with the class. I'm totally okay with that. We should just be respectful of each other and in this kind of format, or even in person, right? So that's my overriding principle is that we want to minimize disruptions and ensure the flow of class, and that everybody is in a good learning environment. Okay. All right. So primary course text. If you haven't got it, you will need it. There will be testing on the text as well. Why do I do this? There's a redundancy. There's a great deal of education theory that says the more time you hit the same subject matter in different ways, the better students learn, right? So like I will say it to you, you will review my PowerPoint notes, and you will read it. They're not going to be identical, but they're going to be similar, these 3 different formats, right? So the hope is that if you engage it 3 different times and then you use some of this in lab, that it actually becomes part of your long-term knowledge as opposed to things you just regurgitate for an exam. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. Why do we test? The education research also shows that testing, and I don't do as much testing in this class as I do in some of my other courses, where I have quizzes almost every 2 weeks. The quizzes are short. I don't do this in this class, so don't worry if you're worried about that. But quizzes are short. Why do I do that? Because if I'm posting readings or things of that sort, or that I want students to learn, even 5, 6 questions on that, it forces students to engage the material regularly. And so again, a larger percentage of the material stays in your head. The whole idea of a class like this, or any class really for that matter, is that you actually learn the material in such a way that you not only remember some of the more important parts of it, but it also conditions or impacts the way you think about other issues, right? It particularly in a course like this one, which is a overview of the big topics in planning, right? This is like the big picture in planning. So even if you're not interested in zoning, or if you're not interested in transportation, or you're not interested in property rights or housing, the hope is that you learn enough of this that you understand how all these pieces fit together in a comprehensive framework, right? Because a city or a state or a country, right? We have different uh, we have different jurisdictions of government in the U.S. City, then county, then state, and then the federal government. Um, and they have some overlapping areas, but planning largely happens at the local or municipal or city level, right? And the hope is that you understand how any of these issues evolve have evolved over time, and how and what the current thinking about these issues is, and how they intersect with regional issues. What's a regional issue? For example, if you take transportation can be a local issue, it can be a county issue, it can be a state issue, or it can be an interstate, right? Federal issue. Because roads go everywhere, planes fly everywhere, right? And you have navigable waterways, both within the United States and between the US and other countries, right? Through the sea. So transportation is really impacts all aspects of the United States. And and sometimes we don't think of it this way, right? Because cities are doing planning, and one city might really be encouraging, or let's say more bicycling or more walking, or they may really take care of the roads, and then the city next door may not. So you'll see this really profound change between the roadways between cities, right? But then you look at the highways, which are not managed by the cities, but they're managed by the state, are maintained a certain way, right? So you have major roads that cut through cities that are highways. I live near one, Imperial Highway. It's not managed by the city, so it's the way we have developed our transportation planning. Sometimes puts the onus or the responsibility for managing different parts of the road network on maybe the city government, or the state government, or the federal government, right? And you can make this case for a lot of different types of land use, not just transportation, but parks as well, okay, or housing, or commercial, or industrial sectors, and so on. Okay, so all of these things, even though we will look at them separately, and um, your book covers them separately, they are not really separate, because they're part of what I call the fabric of civilization. Okay, all right. So the lecture topics are noted here. We're going to do a syllabus review and get a little bit into planning overview. Next week, we're going to look at demography. What is demography? It's basically census, count of people count. But it's not just that. It's things like age structure. It's things like birth rate or fertility rate. They're not the same thing, by the way. Birth rate is different than fertility rate. People use them interchangeably. But hopefully, by the end of this class, you will know how to use the concept of fertility rate and the concept of birth rate, and when it's appropriate, right? Uh, Demography is concerned with three primary things, and everything else sort of flows from that. It's concerned with people and the characteristics of those people in a particular area, in a particular time. It's also concerned with people and the growth of people, which includes the loss of population, right? So growth can be negative or positive, and the characteristic changes that come with that growth, right? So how do people grow? Well, you can add new people through birth, right? births. You can lose people also through death. However, you can also add people through immigration and lose people through immigration, right? Immigration, E-M-I-G-R-A-T-I-O-N, and I-M-M-I-G-R-A-T-I-O-N, right? People coming in and then people leaving out. Immigrants are coming in. If you're emigrating, you are leaving the place you live and going somewhere else. And immigrants also will also come to a place and they will also give birth. They will also die. So the components of population change is what demography is interested in and why they occur, right? Which is through immigration, births, and deaths. So we'll look at that. Then we'll look at the history of urbanization and suburbanization in the U.S. How did the U.S. become a nation of 335 million people, largely in suburbs? Okay, and then we will look at the next two lectures for weeks 4 and 5, the evolution of planning and property rights and the legal framework for planning. Okay, what does that mean? So you've all heard of the First Amendment, right? The right to express yourself freely, right? Now, the question is, what are the limits of that right, right? What are the limits of that right? Like with respect to land use. What do I mean by that? If you think about the homes that you have grown up in, it's very likely that these homes are consistent with your neighbors in some way, meaning like they're not too radically different. Okay, so like if your neighbor has a single story or double story house, it's likely that you had a single and double story house. It's likely that you had a front yard that was roughly maybe 15 to 20 feet from the road, right? We call that a setback in planning, front yard setback. It's likely that your house was stuccoed. It's likely that your house is made out of wood. It's likely that your house had a concrete foundation, right? These are commonalities in California. It's likely that your house was fronted by a sidewalk. And if it was not fronted by a sidewalk, either you grew up in a very wealthy area or an unincorporated area, right? High probability. Both of them, interestingly, both of them lead to no sidewalks because wealthy people don't want people walking around in front of their house. And unincorporated areas simply don't have the same dedicated resources to sidewalk management as incorporated cities. And if you're thinking to yourself, what the heck does that mean? We'll look at what that means later, right? But just remember this, every piece of land in the United States has to, this is going to sound funny or maybe not, belong to somebody. And that somebody can be the government, an entity, a corporation of some type. Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, has told us that corporations are people. I'll let you think about that one. But it can belong to a corporation or an entity like a limited liability corporation, LLC. Many pieces of land and built up structures owned by LLCs, or individuals. Right? Why is this important? And I think if there's an overarching message, like if you had to describe planning to somebody else and they're like, look, man, I don't understand what you guys do. You keep rambling on and on about zoning and setbacks and floor area ratios and entitlement processes and blah, 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 blah. Here's a simpler answer. Planning helps regulate the market. That's it. And they're like, what does that mean? And then you're like, well, do you want a longer or shorter description of that? Right? And let's say they say we want a shorter description of that. You can just say that, look, we're a nation of owners. We own our cars, we own our land, we own things. We are a property rights oriented society. Planning, by and large, is concerned with the management and regulation of property rights. Okay. Is that covered all? No, not quite. But does it get close enough? I would say it gets about 60, 70% close enough. Right. And I bet you may have not thought about it that way, but it really is that. So going back to my First Amendment and the house you grew up in, right? It's likely you grew up in a house. So if you grew up, let's say, in an apartment, it was consistent with other apartments in the neighborhood. Now, some of you are like, no, my parents built a custom home. That's different. And some of you are like, hey, I lived in a historic neighborhood, so it's very different than the other homes. Or some of you may be like, hey, I grew up in a new development. Developers built 50 different units, but every fourth unit was identical, and we didn't have a front yard, right? So many of these new developments don't have front yards, right? Because they're part of a master plan, and the developers has negotiated exemptions basically, or a specific plan for that, right? So now we're getting into the language. The specific plan for that community is different than the prevailing zoning for, let's say, residential one or R1 for that community. Okay. If this is all gobbledygook to you, that's totally fine. It will make more sense when we get to zoning kind of in a deeper way. Jonah, I like how you're celebrating Cal Poly Pomona on your left-hand wall there. That's cool. Is that Cal Poly Pomona?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome, man. Way to represent. I'm representing ENV right here. We all need to belong, right? We can't not belong to cities and organizations, right? Human beings are tribal creatures. We need to belong. Be very wary of people who are like, I don't belong anywhere. They're like, I have no idea how to deal with you. Don't belong anywhere. I don't know what to think about you. I hope you will at some point understand that a lot of what I say is very sarcastic and I don't mean it. So if I say something that's outlandish and you're like, Professor, I can't believe you said that, you can stop me, put it on the chat, or right. I'm joking in many instances. Kyle is representing his high school. Excellent. All my best friends, Kyle, are still from high school. So it's amazing how much, and I can say this, as a dude, we haven't changed. We just have better words now. That's about it. We don't say the same things that cross our minds as openly. So we've gotten better at censoring ourselves. But when we're with each other, it's like the 14-year-olds are back. Anyway, so planning is very much about the government and how it relates to property ownership, right? And so going back to that point I made about the First Amendment. First Amendment, has certain guarantees about freedom of expression, right? But you'll notice that you're not free to express yourself vis-a-vis your land in some way, right? There's actually a lot of restrictions on that. You can't like when I bought my house, I always had this dream of putting a moat around my house, right? And because it'd be so cool if you could, instead of a pool, you just had a moat that you float around, right? And you can, like, on a hot summer day when you're off from work or whatever, you just float around, wave to your neighbors, or just kind of chill in the front, right? Do you think the city would allow that? See, all of you, like, without knowing anything about where I live and the zoning codes that are prevailing in my city, you are saying no. It sounds so absurd that you're like, there's no way a city would allow that. I want you to understand there's nothing natural or unnatural about a moat. Castles had moats, right? They did. Okay, so why can't my house have a moat? Exactly. So the city is like, sir, that's an amazing idea. We would do it ourselves, except it's not in the R1 zoning code for your block or your house or your parcel. Perhaps you live in an HOA, right? Yeah, city's the strongest HOA. Excellent responses. By the way, feel free to have a discussion amongst yourself and share with us in the chat as well. It's totally fine. In fact, it's a great way of if you're like, man, I want to say something funny too, but I can't. Just say it in the chat and people will get a good laugh. Okay. So my rights are abridged, they're restricted in some way by the zoning codes, right? And for the longest time in the United States, I want you to appreciate how, even though I doubt if any of you are property owners or homeowners, maybe you are, but if I was betting, I would say the vast majority of you are not. Your parents, maybe, but not you. So, if you were, maybe you would have some more insight into this. But for a very long time after the formation of the United States, 1776, there it was over 100 years before we even validated legally the ability of cities to tell you not to build a moat outside your house, right? And what I want you to appreciate is that as humans, we live in largely abstract worlds. And these ideas that you think about real and unreal, and I'm going to say this word a few times and I'll type it out also because I just love this word. I think it's the two words that I'll say a lot. One is ontological, and the other one is epistemological, right? Or epistemology. On ontology or ontological statements are concerned with what is a thing and is it a real thing, right? If I say to you, cities are real, do you believe me? I mean, you're like, I live in one. Can you like point to a city? You're only on a map, right? Is a map real? Yes, the physical part is real, but the really interesting thing about maps are that it's an abstraction of what occurs on the ground in real life, right? And so that you can point to city boundaries on the map. Maybe if you're flying in an airplane, you can point to the boundaries outside as well, right? But a city is a thing that is largely existing in your imagination. In fact, as you go through most things in your life, the most important things in your life, like family, you can point to people who constitute your family, but the feelings you have for your family, I love my family, you can't point to love, can you? It's not a thing you can point to, right? This was a point made by one of the foremost philosophers of the 20th century, Wittgenstein. If you're interested, you can go down that rabbit hole. I urge you not to. But basically, his first book was about we can take everything, all language, and reduce it to a mathematical expression, and everything that we can't is not important anyway. Then his second book was, nah, we can't say anything about importance anyway, so we should just stop talking about things that we think we understand, right? Am I simplifying? Yeah, nobody understands Wittgenstein. Maybe it's a handful of folks. But what he was saying is that the things that are really important to people, kinship, friendship, community, love, right? Language can't adequately describe it. But yet we try to, don't we? Right? We write poetry, we write great literature, right? With respect to property rights, if I say you own something, what does that mean? What does that mean? Anybody have an insight? I just got done telling you we're a property ownership society, right? Government
It's
needs to
yours.
regulate the limits of that property ownership. So what is it regulating? Okay, so Colin's saying legal deed to to a piece of land, right? So that's a piece of paper that says, hey, that's a good starting point, Colin, that you are these boundaries. Within that is what you have. You own. Okay, good. But what does that mean to own? I just told you I own my house almost once the mortgage is paid off. I can't build a moat. No, Ivan, you cannot do what you want with it. You cannot build a moat on the piece of land that you own. Aha, Casey, you are responsible for the house. What does that mean? For upkeep? Like make your house look all cool and nice and paint it, not ugly, not leave your garden all weeds everywhere. You got to pay the water bills, do you? Do you have to pay? I mean, do you have to pay the water bills? Threat of what? Jail time? Promise of care? This is confusing, isn't it? Yet we own things, right? Like you're walking around with your new phone or whatever device you're really into, and somebody just walks by you and takes it from you. Can they do that if you own it? No, right? It's yours. Okay, so that should give you some insight about land. If you own your land, can other people come on it without your permission? No. Okay, good. So you guys are still obligation to. I love how you're thinking, most of you. It shows me that the matrix has settled deeply inside your minds. Right? Why do I use the word matrix? Because if you've seen the film or subsequent equally confusing films, um, it, matrix is just another way of saying that human beings live in abstract worlds, and these abstract ideas, they feel real in your mind. They're not real. They just feel real. So you can't you can't necessarily well, you can actually, right? You can exclude others from coming onto your land. In some places, people will pull out guns and shoot them, won't they? And they're justified, right? It's called trespassing. You can't build a moat, but you could theoretically shoot somebody. I want you to appreciate that. Can't build a moat, but I can kill another human being. That's crazy. All right. Is it a GK or a Heike saying time and space may be illusion? Wow, these are deeply ontological statements. Maybe we'll come to them at some point. But so planning. So what planning when you talk about ownership, what planning really gets into is what does ownership mean? So ownership in our society is a bundle of rights. You guys are alluding to that, right? It's a bundle of rights, and there's lecture notes on this. And when we talk about the legal foundations of planning in more detail, we will actually talk about real property and the ownership and what ownership means, right? But it's a bundle of rights. But those rights have limits, and depending on the context, right? Depending on the context, and so with real estate or real property, rather, there's a series of things that you have. Some of you are alluding to this that you have to do if you own it, and there's a series of things that you can do to others, including exclude others. But there are limits to these rights. Okay? And my silly example was the moat, but there are lots of other limits to these rights as well. Right? There's a thing called eminent domain. The city, the government can come in and decide that there's a better use for your property than you living in it, and then they'll pay you, and then you're like, you can't force me to move. Then you put up a battle, right? Is it a literal battle? No, it's a battle in courtrooms. And if your pockets are deep enough, your lawyers are good enough, maybe you could win. Chances are you won't. Right? Eminent domain. What is eminent domain? Basically, using your house for a public good. What is a public good? Right? So when we talk about can you guys see this? Kind of blocking out. Anyway, it's my little copy of the Constitution of the United States. Right? Property rights and the limits to property rights are enumerated in the Constitution of the United States. In fact, the basis of government is elaborated upon in the Constitution of the United States. Give me 1 second, Kyle. Let me and a few others. And what can government do? Government can regulate. What can it regulate? Health, safety, welfare, and this last one you're going to love, morals. That's right. In the land of the free, home of the brave. Constitution of the United States, and we'll go into where it actually says the government can deal with the health, safety, welfare, and morals. For me, the morals part is a little bit. You're really getting into like the things that are very ambiguous. Health is a little bit more straightforward, but as we found out during the COVID pandemic, health is also not straightforward, is it? Safety is not straightforward, is it? Welfare is not straightforward, is it? Right? And so here's the other larger point I wish to make is that even in a society where we have a law of the land, the Constitution, which limits property rights, right? There's an inherent tension between the various laws that govern properties or private property and and the duties, obligations of the government to ensure a society for everyone else. Right? What does that mean? It means right of way, easements, maintenance, stormwater management. Means using eminent domain to build freeways sometimes, but not using it to just lure a Walmart into your community. Right? Because the government can say, like, look, I know you love your house, or Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, we know you love your mom and pop store, but we're just going to eminent domain it and sell it to Walmart because Walmart brings in more taxes. And you're like, but I've been a part of this community for 3 generations. My family started this store. I don't want to get rid of this store. And they're like, that's really nice and cute, but yeah, we need you to leave because Walmart brings in. And then you just keep saying how much you like the community and they just eminent domain you and kick you out. Can they do that? Yes. Are there limits to that? Yes. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled that economic development was this is the early 2000s, aughts, was a viable use of eminent domain. And every major government, from the Bush administration down all the way to the local city government, most of them said, heck no. They realized how crazy that was, right? Or maybe not. Maybe not. Okay, so all right. Going back to the other part of the syllabus here. So this is all legal framework of planning, property rights. Then you have the comprehensive plan, zoning. I just talked about zoning. Okay. What is the comprehensive plan? Every city has something called a general plan, right? And the general plan has goals and objectives. And what are the parts of the general plan? Well, general plan cares about housing, right? It's important. It cares about transportation. It calls it circulation. It cares about natural resources and their conservation, has a conservation element. It cares about safety, a safety element. So all the parts of the general plan, the major parts, are called elements. It has safety. It has noise. Noise is a weird one, right? Noise, it's kind of like, why would a city be so concerned with noises? But it helps, noise impacts welfare and safety. So it has a noise element. And the latest element, I think there's 7 or 8. I always forget, even though I've taught this class a bunch of times. 7 or 8 required elements by the state of California. And the newest addition to this is environmental justice. What does this mean? This is where public health is brought more explicitly back into the planning fold. Environmental justice element is basically about, look, if you stuck a bunch of people next to the freeway and their kids are getting asthma at higher rates, right? You need to address that somehow because it's unfair. Okay, so environmental justice is, when does a health, safety, welfare issue impact a particular group of people? And it's no surprise, it's usually people who are on the lower end of the income spectrum who are more disproportionately impacted. But the environmental justice element says you have to do something about it. Aryan's asking the gazillion, trillion, billion, quadrillion dollar question. What can a resident do to hold the city accountable? So Aryan, to answer your question, I would say, what can you do to hold anybody else accountable who has wronged you in some way? Sue them. That's right. Does a lawsuit guarantee that people will do what even if the ruling is in your favor? No. People don't understand this about the law, is that the law is not a guarantee of action. It's a guarantee that maybe you'll move in the right direction. And a lawsuit does not indicate how valid any given issue is also. It's used often as a strategy by corporations, by people, by governments to do to different ends. What does that mean? Sometimes if you get sued, you'll sue everybody else who's involved in a project, not because they're at fault, but because you're like, their insurance companies will settle. And because I owe this person $100, even if I get $20 from other people, I just owe 80. I owe 90 because the lawyers took the other 10 of the 20. Right? It's a strategy, right? But you're asking an excellent question, Aryan, because one of the most important parts, and the only one, there's a few pieces to the general plan that have to be updated regularly. The housing element is one of them. It used to be like 2 years. Now I think it's 4 or 7 years. And the housing element basically is, look, how's the population going to change? And what kind of housing do you need based on the population change? So it's not like, oh, we have 3 people, one new house. But like those 3 people, what income level are they going to be? What can they afford? Do you need more apartments, single family homes? The housing element articulates these needs. It's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and it's done with a planning agency that exists at the county level. It's called SCAG, Southern California Association of Government. Okay, we'll talk more about that. But so basically, the cities have to enable the development of more housing, specifically multifamily, more affordable housing. Cities have never done this. They'll say, oh, we need 300 units. Cities would never do it. And so the state finally started suing the cities the last few years. And because cities actually don't exist as far as the Constitution is concerned. Cities are what we call creatures of the state, meaning the power of the city to tell you, hey, you can't build a moat comes from the state, because the Constitution of the United States says there are certain powers of the government limited to the federal government, and what's not reserved to the federal government is a power of the state or the people, which is terribly ambiguous, but by design. All right. And our founding fathers actually were. I took a trip to Washington D.C. recently, and I was surprised by how much how interesting it was. B, how much it inspired me to sort of feel some pride in this amazing apparatus system of government we have created that emanates from the Constitution, right? To balance the will of the people with the need to get stuff done. Because if you get a bunch of people together, they won't often agree on anything, right? So you need that. There's a tension there. So the Constitution it sort of articulates some of the big picture things, like, hey man, people are free, we need this, right? And initially, it wasn't everybody's free, but it evolved, the Bill of Rights. Eventually, the right to vote wasn't even given to women, right? Until the early 1900s, 1920s. But it's a living document. If you go to the Jefferson Memorial, Jefferson Memorial in particular, it's very clear. The Constitution must evolve with time, and it must reflect society's current thinking about itself. That's beautiful. It's a really beautiful sentiment, right? And as planners, we play an integral role in that, actually, in interpreting the Constitution and how it applies to civilization, roads, sewage, housing, economic development, and so on. Okay, and so our Constitution says the federal government is important and the state government is important and the people are important. And now it's very ambiguous. The cities are like, we're here, we have general plans, all planning occurs at the city level, and the state is like, well, you're not building housing, so we're going to take some of this police power back. And the cities are really pissed off, some of them. Right? That's kind of where we're at right now. But I'm glad, very long-winded response, Aryan, which is that the law has more teeth now, or the housing element has more teeth now because of litigation. Lawsuits, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at that, if you're a lawyer, you're like, yes, awesome, more work. Lawsuits are the way to give teeth to policies, rules, legislation, regulation, and so forth. Okay, so we will talk about all of that a bit more. We'll talk about housing, right? We'll talk about, in the context of housing and economic development, we'll also talk about zoning, what zoning means, right? The power to zone that's given to municipalities, again, is a police power of the state. And as I mentioned earlier, the police power of the state is limited to health, welfare, safety, and morals. So you have to demonstrate that zoning is an appropriate use of the police power of the city. You have to demonstrate that the city has police power. Okay, we did that in 1920s with a case called Euclid versus Ambler Realty. Supreme Court said, cities, go out and zone. You are legally allowed to do so. Okay. And in those zoning standards are restrictions on property development, including my right to build a moat. Right. So zoning basically is like, what can you build? What can you do there? And now the thinking in zoning is we kind of overdid this. We kind of killed, right? Because if you look at zoning standards, and they get into things like setbacks, 20-foot setback in the front, 20 foot in the back. A typical lot is, let's say, 60 feet wide. So you're talking 60 times 20, 1,200 times 2, 2,400. If you have a 6,000, so zoning standards would often have minimum lot sizes. Let's say your minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet, or 7,000, or 75. This is typical. Right, let's say 75 or 74 for the sake of math. 74 minus 24 is 5,000. So you can only build on 5,000 square feet. You just took away 2,400 square feet to build. It has to be open by zoning standards, right? And so if you multiply two 2,400s together, you get 4,800, which is 5,000 square feet. You could literally put another house. on all that land you're not using, right? So some people argue that zoning actually creates land scarcity, which creates higher property values, which has basically made property unaffordable for many people. Okay, so planners are not going, man, I think we might have overdone this zoning thing. Let's take a step back, have less regulation, let people kind of build what they want, as long as, you know, in a residential area, they're kind of keeping to the same design more or less, be a little bit less strict about this, and we can regulate uses a bit more. Meaning, like, you know, if you're a residential area, we obviously don't want heavy industry in a residential area. Planners are saying stuff like that. But if, you know, we'll give you more flexibility as to what you are doing inside, as long as you kind of make it look like a residential area outside. So, like, this transition is sometimes called form-based codes. Form-based codes, right? It's not exactly, but kind of giving you an overview, right? So we'll talk about that in zoning, and then, you know, in the context of all of that, we'll talk about how you can actually enable affordable housing. What does affordable housing look like? There's different ways to do this. You can give subsidies to renters. We used to call that Section 8. Now they're called vouchers. Or you can give subsidies to developers. They're called tax credits for building apartments, low-income housing tax credit. We'll talk about that. But we'll also talk about mortgages and housing markets. I find that students sometimes don't understand what a mortgage is, what a secondary market for mortgage is, like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, things like that, in the housing lecture. We'll discuss economic development. This is a very big area, but I'll give you some general brushstrokes about economic development. But basically, city gets revenue in many different ways. Property tax is one of them. But in California, property taxes are capped because of Proposition 13. So a city can get revenue through also. It can also get revenue through other types of taxes, right? And so what are those sources of revenue for a city? So short answer here is that more businesses you have, right? So, like, if you have a vibrant downtown area, or if you have, like, more industrial manufacturing, right, or commercial areas, the city has more money, like, basically. And so that's economic development, a large part of it. But also, it's also, you know, jobs. Not all cities, again, cities have limited revenue, so they can't always address all of these things. So for many cities, economic development is often limited to, like, can we attract a big box store or something like that. Yep, community development, which is a little bit different. We'll talk about that. Community development is more about things like getting people more involved, social capital, and so on. But those two topics typically go hand in hand, community and economic development. And then is, of course, transportation planning. I'd mentioned this earlier. A lot of this is done regionally by SCAG, but cities also do it, right? The cities maintain their own roads. They have their own police force often. Their speed limits. They invest in things like speed humps and roundabouts, right? Some communities are closed off. They're dead ends, right? So there's a lot done for traffic management at the local level. And the big thing now is active transportation. You've heard of that, right? So enabling people bicycling, walking, enabling people or enabling households, connecting them to bike paths, trails, right? Active transportation. This is a big strategy, right? Why? Because it's not just good for traffic management. It's also good for public health. More people walk, right? The healthier they are. It impacts overweight, obesity rates, and public health indicators as well. And it also impacts climate change, right? Less pollution, less use of cars, more walking. So better for public health, better for climate, better for congestion. So however, on the other hand, places that we really want to go in Southern California in particular, they're hard to get to without a car, right? So the other part of transportation is the public transportation, right? So what's public transportation? It's light rail, right? Light rail and buses, and some other and mixture of that, right? You can have van pools, and also Uber, not really, or Lyft is not really part of that because that's still single person or two people in a car. But that kind of transportation planning is done at the regional level. When I say regional, I mean county, usually. SCAG, again, comes into play. We'll talk about that. And then you have environmental planning. This is probably one of the fastest growing, and it really ties into transportation as well, right? I mentioned climate change earlier, which is a huge environmental issue, but environmental planning also deals with things like point source pollution, management of point source pollution, stormwater management. So some of the biggest things that cities are responsible for as far as reporting to the state, stormwater management is a big one. And you can imagine why that's important, right? There's a threat of flooding when you have rain, but also stormwater, because we have largely impermeable surfaces or semi-permeable surfaces, which have a lot of gunk on them. Gunk is what? Dirt, but also chemicals, things that are potentially hazardous not only to humans but also to other animals, flora and fauna, vegetation, and there's debris. It can also contaminate the water supply, right? And so stormwater management is a critical thing that the cities do. Yeah. Okay, so I think those are the, let me see, big top. Did I miss anything? Let me just check. No, that's it. Those are the big topic areas for the class. What is your grading like? Your grading is shown here. So your labs together are 60% of your grade. Your midterm, which is going to be on the book, and I'll tell you the chapters when we get to, oh, I didn't change the dates here. I'll change this. This is going to be, I think, one day, 17th or anyway, but it's roughly around the same time. I'll fix this. The book, the midterm is on the book. It'll be about 15%. And then the final exam, which is comprehensive, will be the other 25%. So 40% is, if you're like really into multiple choice exams, you'll do amazingly well here. It's pretty straightforward, nothing super tricky. And the other 60% comes from your labs. I average all of these, weight them depending on how the class is doing, and you get one grade, which you get for your lab and your lecture portion. Okay. All right. So Thomas is asking, why is it so hard for the U.S. to make good transportation? We'll talk more about this, Thomas. But the answer is convoluted. Probably the simplest way to state it right now is that there's a lot more money to be made in building homes and selling them and creating suburbanization. We have a lot of land in the U.S., a lot, right? And one of the ways that you get people rich is by making them property owners. And if people think they're rich, they're not saving as much because they're like, look, I got a house, it's going up in value, and I can sell it when I'm retiring and save less. Why is not saving as important? Because if you save too much, you have the problem you have in China, for example. The saving rates are like 10, 15%. When you save too much, what are you not doing? You're not spending money on eating out, on not getting Amazon deliveries every day. You're not helping the economy. You're not doing your duties as a good American citizen and consuming. If you're not consuming, corporations aren't selling. If corporations aren't selling, stocks are not going up. If stocks are not going up, the 1/4 of the world that is employed in the financial industries is not doing well. Right? And so we need to sell houses. And the way you sell houses is you build them in a country like the US where you have lots of land, you just build them all over the place. Then you create roads to these houses, and then the cars go to these houses, which are also sold, right, on the market. Is that the only reason? No, but it's a pretty compelling reason, actually, for suburbanization. That's one of the reasons we don't have good transportation. New York was one of the first cities that actually was very dense. They had lots of little factories in New York, right? One of the first major cities, if not the, I mean, it was, sorry, the first major city in the U.S. But the folks who owned the factories, and these are small factories, like 8 to 10 people worked on the first floor and they lived above them. We call this mixed use now, or live work lofts. Same thing. The people who owned them often lived outside the city in garden cities. This is a thing you may have covered in some of your reading, the garden city movement, which is basically suburbanization. So people who could left the city because you had horse poop everywhere, right? Carriages drawn by the horses, and it was polluted. So you got this idea that, look, if you have made it, you are king of the castle, and the castle is your own home. The only way to have your own home, your own little castle, is some subdivision somewhere. Okay, and then you couple that to the rise of the automobile. We need to sell automobile. This was Henry Ford's masterstroke, was that he paid his people so much money. Why did he pay his people so much money? Because it was so boring to just do the same job over and over again on an assembly line. He paid them enough money to buy a car in like 6 months of wages. You can see the genius in that, right? I'll let you think about that. And then you got to drive this car somewhere, so the government enabled the building of roads. Well, where are these roads going? To your own castle. Here we are. And we have words like car culture. And of course, somebody said big oil. That's a huge reason, of course. Fossil fuels have everything to do with the economy and nothing to do with technology and the ability to actually power things in alternative ways. By the way, even though I'm being tongue-in-cheek about the economy, I don't mean to suggest it's not a good reason. It allows us to sit here and use things like Zoom and not worry about food and water, right? Because we know it'll be there. There are economies of scale. The question is, how can we do it without killing off the planet and each other? Because we are at that critical juncture now. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Any questions? So yeah, I can tell, right? It's an hour of me talking at you, so you can see the energy level starts to wane. I really appreciate you guys leaving your screens on. Again, it's not a requirement, but I love just looking at your faces. Kind of keeps me going, and the second thing is it allows me to gauge the energy of the class a little bit. Okay, I will record this and post this on the Canvas. I do it through YouTube, so I link it to a YouTube video, so you don't have to download anything. You just click on it and it goes there. And I will see you in lab. Okay, take care. Have a good one. Welcome again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see ya.
Thank you.
See ya.